as we're seeing some other people joining in. We're going to start in about 2 minutes. So once again, thank you for joining. Thank you for making out this time. And I trust it will be an impactful session for you. Okay, so we can start now. Once again, good morning, good afternoon. Today we are talking about driving successful transformations. And we are taking a look at that from the viewpoint of restructuring and restructuring efforts. So yeah, it's fairly obvious. We all know that we're experiencing, or at least we have some realization that we're experiencing some of the highest levels of uncertainty and volatility that we've ever seen, probably even exceeding the COVID era. And this is mostly fueled by geopolitical tensions, rapid technological advancements that we're seeing. And the truth is, very few industries, if any, are going to be spared from these impacts. Now, most organizations, they're going to need to rework their business models, rework their operations, rework their processes. They're going to need to get leaner, more efficient, right? And especially considering the facts and the changes that have been brought about by the birth of AI tools, and AI agents, and other emerging accelerating technologies. So it's a given. Restructuring is going to have to play out because most organizations are going to turn to restructuring in order to respond to. So probably I see people raising their hands, and I will probably just want to ask. Let me give you. Could you type on the chat box while you're raising your hands, just so that we know if you can hear us and see us well? Okay, we can see and hear. All right, so we'll continue. So for those of you raising your hands, if there are any issues, please go ahead and just type it in your chat box. We'll get to you as soon as we can. And so just to continue, so where was I? Yes. A lot of organizations are going to have to embark on some sort of restructuring in response to these external challenges. And if right now, depending on your context, where your organization is right now, you're thinking of probably a business process improvement, some sort of performance improvement, probably even thinking of reworking your reward and compensation structure to further drive the kind of performance you want to see, or you're simply looking at what most people are looking towards to now, which is some sort of workforce deleveraging or some downsizing, right? Then this session should benefit you because you're going to leave here at the end of the day with some actionable insights that can help you ensure that you raise the odds of success of your restructuring efforts. Now, welcome officially to SIL's Business Webinar Series. We have designed this as virtual, highly focused knowledge sharing sessions that are designed to bring together just small groups of professionals to provide that hands-on real-time problem solving, masterminding, and peer learning. Now, we have curated this session around specific themes, industries, regions, and roles. The focus will always be the same, ensuring that you get some actionable insights and relevant strategies that you can apply today and right away. Now, my name is Patrick Awodu. I'm the CEO of StreetSet Integrated Limited, SIL. We are management and change consultants with particular competencies in change, organization and people improvement, rewards, compensation, and benefit design, and also managed services. we have a focus at where the intersection of these capabilities and how they can actually spur and drive transformational growth for Nigeria and indeed Africa. With me today is Nick. Nick Peschek is the Managing Director and lead for Qatar's European, Middle East and African practice. And he draws on a very wide skill set that helps organizations formulate and achieve their strategy and culture. And he helps his clients surface that delta between aspirations and reality, helps them close that gap. And it's also, through his career journey, he's moved from the circus to unicorns, startups, process-oriented United Nations, and he's tackled challenges around storytelling, scaling, sustainability, and culture transformations. Nick, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Thanks for the intro.
Yes, could you just share where you're joining us from?
So today I'm in Parma, Italy. We've got a major pharmaceutical client that we're working on a restructuring with, actually. So it's pretty fitting for today's topic. I'm holed away in a cubicle somewhere after a morning of board meetings, but usually I'm based in Barcelona, Spain.
Oh, that's great to hear. For us here in Lagos, it's been a very rainy day. It started raining this morning, so it's cold. And I trust that this session will be just a useful diversion for all those that are locked up in their offices or traffic just because of the rain, right? So before I hand over to you, let me just walk through the flow of this session and what audience and the participants can expect. So we're going to start with an overview of transformations and change efforts in general. Nick is going to be taking that. And after that, he's going to hand over to me, and I'll focus more on restructuring in Nigeria and West Africa. Following that, we can now have a Q&A and have some discussions. Now, so if throughout the session, during our presentations, you have any questions, please go ahead, feel free, go and type it on the chat box. If you want any particular one of us, if you're directing those questions to any particular one of us, go ahead and highlight it there. During the Q&A session, yes, we'll both make an attempt to answer those questions. So Nick, before I hand off to you and before you begin your presentation, so just a quick question, right? What kind of valuable takeaway do you hope attendees get from this seminar, this web series?
Oh, that's a great question, Patrick. I hope at a minimum there's inspiration.
Yeah.
I also hope there's a sense that what you might be going through in your business context, that you're not alone, that actually there are folks that are thinking about this, like, for example, Sil and Cotter, and then likely the other 100 or so folks that have joined. So there's a community and a spirit of stronger together, because one of the things I'll talk about is there are no concrete answers to the moment that we're faced with. So we need to figure them out together with curiosity and collaboration, and finding those networks is really the way forward, whether it's a restructuring transformation or just getting energy at the end of or the middle of a rainy day in West Africa.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that, Nick. So you can go ahead, start your presentation.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm gonna walk through a few things with you, and there's going to be, I'll tell you now, there's going to be a couple of moments where I ask for audience participation. So I think we've got the chat working. So get ready to answer in your chat. No worries if you're wrong. It's actually more interesting if we all learn something. And maybe one bit before I jump into it that you had said about my background, Patrick, which I think is useful to highlight. Because I come from what I would say is an eclectic professional background, whether that's the circus, United Nations, unicorn startups, especially in the data space, it's something that we pride ourselves at Cotter is being very industry agnostic. So what we've learned over the last 50 years of research is applicable whether you're leading Bardem and Bailey, whether you're leading ACNUR or a UN agency, or Palantir, where I used to work. And what we're doing now in the last couple of years, we're really realizing that the organizations and industries that are most in need of this type of thinking are the legacy organizations. So manufacturing, supply chain, natural resources, pharmaceutical companies, the ones that have created success in the past and don't exactly know how to change to be able to create success in the future. So with that as context, we're seeing a couple of things in the world right now, and I think many of them will likely resonate with you. So we're living in a world that is more complex, no question about that. More uncertain. Get to a question around that in a second. Uncertainty is something that we've really latched onto in the last couple of months because it's kind of the crux, I think, of our current geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in, which has enormous business consequences. Whether you're in pharma, supply chain, etc., every new executive order that gets signed in the largest economy in the world has ripple effects throughout all industries that are globalized. The other two that are interesting is the moving faster. So we don't have enough time today to get into all of the details behind this, but there's some really interesting research around computational speed and how much that's sped up over the last couple of years. It's literally astronomical. And then lastly, the disruption, the opportunity for smaller, whether they're unicorns or just 5 people organizations, to have an idea and be able to bring that to market in a way that's faster and can capture market share in a meaningful way. You had mentioned, Patrick, AI. Building a business on AI now is incredibly easy or different than trying to transform a 100-year-old legacy mining operation. I'm also seeing that there might not be audio. Maybe I'll pause for a second to see if that's true.
So I'm hearing you, Nick. It
You're hearing me?
might
Great.
be, yes.
So,
You could go
so
ahead.
maybe it's one participant and we can kind of work with
Mm,
them in the background.
mm,
That's great.
yeah.
So then here's wonderful. Thanks. Some confirmation. So then here's the question for the group right now. The World Uncertainty Index, which is an index that we use to track uncertainty. It's based on a couple of academics. We'll show you the site in a little bit if you're interested. We've also done another webinar with the academics that have created this, so it's kind of an interesting backstory. I'd like you to take a minute and reflect back on the last 25 years, so back to 2000. Which of these 4 events do you think had the biggest spike in global uncertainty? 9/11, 2008 financial crisis, COVID 2020, or 2025 current geopolitical environment. So in the chat, literally put a number 1, 2, 3, or 4. That'll be easier, but you can also type in the full world if you want. Brilliant, Antonio. Thanks. All right, I've got 1 vote for COVID. Let's see if we can get maybe 10 quick answers. No issue if you're wrong or right. It's more just for curiosity in terms of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. Okay, a couple for COVID. That makes sense. That was at least an impactful time for many of us. Maybe see if 1 or 2 more. Okay, current geopolitical COVID and now seem to be the ties. The one thing that we're realizing from the results, which we always do, is that even though 9/11 and the financial crisis in the moment felt like the biggest events we had globally lived through, in retrospect, right, they become small. And so here's what that looks like in the actual index. This is 9/11 in 2001. You can already tell by the scale of the graph that that's not the highest. Financial crisis, there's a bit more. You can imagine 9/11 is, maybe a bit more centralized, but the security impacts of it globally had a big effect. Financial crisis impacted just about every industry that was based on banking or our global financial system in some shape or form. So also had an enormous impact. There's a few more blips, but really the next big spike is COVID. And this is where, in that moment, if you remember back 5 years ago, when we were all in different countries being locked down in different manners, not sure if we were going to be able to get a vaccine out in time, and the backstory around how the vaccine industry kind of mobilized within 9 months is pretty impressive as well. That's not the highest spike. The highest spike is literally May 2025. So we are living in the biggest spike of uncertainty since we started tracking this, which I believe goes back to the 1980s. So there is something incredibly unique about our moment in time, which essentially means looking backwards is no longer helpful, right? Looking backwards for clues is no longer as helpful as it used to be when we would say, what happened then? What lessons can we learn? And how do we push them into the future? We are in a uncertain world where we need to actually think broadly and creatively, as opposed to latching on to past lessons learned. It would be a bit simpler if it was just uncertainty, though. So this is, the world news on a daily basis from basically all major publications. I'm working deeply in the pharmaceutical company and extractive industries right now. At least in the pharmaceutical industries, there was a recent executive order signed a week and a half ago. So they're, throwing their hands up, not sure what's going to happen with the US market, if that's part of it or not. 70% of global pharmaceutical revenues comes from the US, right? So it's a major disruption and uncertainty in that particular industry. And each industry has their own specific tariff that's really impacting how they think about supply chain and how they think about business continuity. So it's not just uncertainty, however, it's also pace. So another quick audience participation. Number of how long it took to reach 50 million users for the top telephone. So if you think back to when you first got a telephone or when this telephone existed, how many years do you think it would take to get to 50 million users? Give a quick number in the chat and let's see how people respond. Again, no need to be right if this is your first time thinking about it. 30 years, it's a great starting point. Yep, we'll wait for one or more two to expose it. Antonio, thank you for kicking us off with your curiosity. So I'll give people a hint. 75 years. What about for the radio then? If telephone was 75, how much might the radio have been? It's okay, try audience. 38 years. So Antonio actually got that one right for this. That's half the time. And as you think about these major technological disruptions, TV was 13 years to reach 50 million users. The iPod, if you remember those, 3 years. Angry Birds was a month. And Threads, a year or so ago, was just over a day, right? So we've gone from a pace of years to months to days to hours. And that's the type of disruption that businesses are facing left and right. And so for us, the way that we think about this is it's only a problem if one condition is not met. It's only a problem if you look at that external curve on the top, which is what I've just walked through, that's the exponential change that's happening in our business environment. It's only a problem if your internal change, the bottom line, doesn't keep pace, right? If you're keeping pace with change, if not even outpacing external change or market changes, then you're leading the pack, you're ahead of the curve. But it's this opportunity gap between the two that is what most companies face of how do you become truly adaptable? How do you pivot in the right moments? And how do you know the right information to be able to make those correct decisions? And so that's where, for us, one of our main key models around the neuroscience of change comes into play. And for me, this is a big key up, Patrick, for you in terms of reorganization and restructuring, because it's our inability to respond to this in the right way that creates a survive response in organizations. You can think of survive responses as a channel that's activated in people that puts them into fight or flight. It gets them anxious, it gets them scared. It may get them focused on a problem. They may be able to solve it, but it's what leads to burnout. So it's not sustainable growth or sustainable change. So if you need something done immediately by 5 p.m. or end of week, triggering survive may be a useful tactic in the short term, but it's not what's going to actually get you to bigger picture thinking and to sustainable change. It's also, going back to uncertainty, the type of thinking that harkens back to past learnings of what we've seen in past patterns and reapplying them. So in a world where that's no longer possible or no longer helpful, survive actually becomes less and less important. What we should be doing instead then is activating thrive. This is how we get the curiosity, the openness, the collaboration, because in a world that becomes more uncertain, where we don't know what might happen, what we actually want people doing is sensing for answers, sensing for information, and trying to work together with new either departments, organizations, or stakeholders to be able to move forward. So the two restructurings, for example, that we're working with right now are in the pharmaceutical industry and in the kind of construction major capital projects space. Both of those are incredibly complex environments. You could imagine, simplifying here, but you can imagine a survive technique would be, let's focus on ourselves and restructure based on what we think is important. The thrive approach would be, let's bring all of our stakeholders, government, supply chain, end users, patient advocacies, et cetera, into that conversation earlier to see what they actually need, how we can help them, and then back into what the right organizational model would actually be for us. Which then all lands on adaptability. And over the last 50 years, we've honed in on 3 different pieces that are important for adaptable organizations. But first, let me just briefly make the financial argument for why this is important. This is research from the 90s, which means it's a bit outdated. So this actually demonstrates that adaptable organizations outperform by 5 times on a variety of metrics, right? You can see some of them there. You can see the book reference for the longer kind of study and then the analysis if you'd like. But we'd been saying this so often that we realized citing something from the 90s simply doesn't float anymore. It's too old and it's too outdated. So we went back and we updated. We found all of the same organizations that John did in the 90s. We tracked them to today, where they were acquired. We kind of accounted for that, added more in based on what we were missing. And here's what we came up with late last year when we did the analysis again. Instead of outperforming by 5, they outperform by a factor of 8. So it makes sense, right? If uncertainty and volatility is increasing, you can imagine that being adaptable becomes even more critical for business success. So 8 times more successful by a variety of metrics, and twice as likely to be acquired if you are not adaptable, right? So if acquisition is in your strategy, maybe being unadaptable is okay. But if being acquired is not what you're going for strategically, it's not going to work out. So this for us just kind of continues to make the case for adaptable organizations. Patrick, before I hand it over to you, I just want to go through one more quick bit around what the 3 components are. So there's 3 overlapping components to create a truly adaptable organization. The first is change management, change-friendly management approaches. And this is really where the restructuring and reorganization becomes most critical, because it's the place where it goes wrong most often. The second is around an adaptive culture. So there's loads of research around how culture actually, whether it eats strategy for breakfast or not, is one of the driving forces to make an organization successful in the long term. So making sure that the management approaches you're putting into place align with your culture and the future culture that you're looking to embed in the organization. And then lastly, around change capabilities, this for us is so important because it's about people, and it's about viewing people as a growth potential as opposed to a fixed potential. So recognizing that everyone has the capability to grow, to learn, and to be curious. And if you invest in that, that's what's going to create that culture, and that's what's going to help you then grow forward. I can keep going, Patrick, a little bit more, but I am conscious of time. So maybe I'll hand it over to you now in terms of going deeper into reorganizations, and then we can do questions afterwards, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you very much, Nick, for those insightful nuggets you just shared. I found myself actually taking notes. And let me share my screen so that I can speak more on. Okay. So thank you, Nick, for that handoff and for the context and the background you gave around change. how fast and the fast pace of change, the fact that change in itself is increasing in complexity, increasing in speed, volatility, right? And while sometimes it can actually be surprising to realize that right now, the uncertainty and volatility is actually more than it was in COVID, right? Especially given the fact that COVID was such an impactful experience on all our lives. But right now, especially with the geopolitical tensions, right, this uncertainty and volatility has actually spiked. So change, as Kota so rightfully says, is no longer episodic, it's now continuous. And a lot of organizations are going to turn to restructuring or some form of restructuring in response to these geopolitical shocks and also in some cases economic shocks. And it's no different for Nigeria and Africa. In fact, we're seeing a lot of it play out. Just recently, we began work on restructuring that was focused, or that is focused more around compensation and the reward system, because most organizations have undergone several rounds of restructuring. And what they're beginning to see, even if they are not certain about it, is a sense that previous ones haven't worked. And so they are looking for new and adaptive approaches in order to ensure that the restructurings they undertake now and maybe in the future are more successful. And so just to give some common ground as to what we mean when we speak of restructuring, is simply speaking, when you change an organization or a business decides to change its operation and financial structure, mostly driven by a need to improve performance, and it's often focused on efficiencies and profitability. Now, there are two broad approaches towards restructuring. One is pursuing efficiencies and profitability with cost cutting as the central focus. The other is pursuing improvements while focusing on reworking and rethinking how activities and work gets done, and also the job roles that currently exist within the organization. And if we are factual, most times when you hear restructuring, you think downsizing, redundancies, you think some sort of workforce deleveraging. And with all that, there tends to be a lot of emotional baggage, some sort of heightened emotions tied around normal restructuring efforts. And you can't really blame, it's not something to be surprising for everybody, and any one of us that is listening here that has undergone or been part of a restructuring effort, you know how it can be and how tense the environment can be when a restructuring is not done right, okay? And so it's, in fact, for me, myself, I got into change and change management because of a restructuring I participated in. We actually consulted for that restructuring, and at the end of the day, when we realized we were not getting the kind of benefits we had thought we were going to get in the beginning, it's spurred me to want to look inwards to find out what we did wrong. And that led me down the road of change and improving change capabilities. Now, interestingly, 75% of all restructurings fail. Now, while this is part of the broader pattern of the failure percentage for change efforts in general, but it does bear some particular thoughts when you think about it. 70 to 75% of all restructurings. And now this is not peculiar to Nigeria or any particular geographies, right? It doesn't matter what geography, it doesn't matter where the organizational maturity, it doesn't matter the industry, the sector, right? Or even sometimes the competence of leadership. Across boards, fairly evenly, 75% fail. And when you also take cognizance of the fact that most reorganizations are scary and painful, even if they're inevitable and a necessary part of every organization's growth, it kind of leads you to wonder that there might be a correlation between the fact that restructurings are scary and painful and the fact that they fail, and whether there's some causation between that, whether they fail because they are scary and painful, or they are scary and painful because they fail. However, as I will show, and research has shown, they fail for a totally different reason, and often to do with how we approach, those restructurings. It's something Nick alluded to and mentioned earlier, the fact that legacy organizations right now are looking to rethink some of their approaches because they find that what stood them in good stead a couple of years ago, or even the last decade, can no longer work. So we can look to the past to help us with strategies for the future. The now and the future that is ahead of us is totally different. When we look at the data that Nick has shared, we see that if we continue with the mindset of the past, we probably cannot achieve those hoped for benefits that we look to see in the future. Now, regardless of what, there are always reasons for a restructuring. As I mentioned earlier, restructurings tend to happen. Organizations, in one way or the other, they actually undertake some sort of restructuring, and they do so for both internal and external reasons, and often to hit because of lower costs. They want to lower costs, they want to increase revenues, they want to achieve greater efficiencies, and generally spurred by probably shifts in demand, shifts in market factors, new technologies, or as currently happening, some geopolitical decisions made in one part of the globe that's affecting, where we are now. Now, regardless of these reasons, restructurings, when they happen, needs to be successful. Now, just to go back to my earlier assertion, which research has actually shown that 70 to 75% of restructurings fail. Most times when you ask or when you speak to people that are involved in restructuring efforts, they tend to think that it has succeeded. And one of the reasons is that they look at success, or their measures of success at principally there are two lenses. One, has the process been concluded, right? And two, did the quantum or value of cost cutting, was it achieved? Now, if you judge your restructuring efforts on whether the restructuring program has ended and whether you succeeded in cutting costs, you miss certain nuances that actually reveal a broader pattern of success or failure. Now, if you're taking a look at profitability, you're taking a look at long-term profitability, innovation, employee engagement, right? You see that for most of these organizations, even if they think they have succeeded in cutting costs to the value that they had hoped for, there's always a dip in productivity. There's a dip in creativity and innovation. There's a dip in long-term profitability. And now when you consider those as metrics of success, you begin to see that most of these restructurings do not pan out the way that you first of all envisioned, right? So yes, you've met your timelines, but the size of benefits, if at all you've actually achieved those benefits, you don't bank the size that you initially thought of. And sometimes you miss out on achieving truly amazing results from that particular exercise. And now there's a typical way. One of the reasons why this happens is that there's a typical approach to restructuring, right? And then there's an approach that based off of the work of Kotter and the new research in neuroscience that helps to activate that tribe mentality and that can pervade its way throughout the organization such that you actually spur productivity, innovation, and profitability. Now, if we want to speak to the typical approach, and now when I'm speaking to this typical approach, I'm not talking towards the methodology itself. Now, for the most part, the technical methodology for restructuring or reorgs are fairly well researched. They're fairly competent. There's a lot of work done about that, and picking up anyone to probably serve in good stead. However, there's always been, for most change efforts, and particularly for restructuring, probably because of the emotions that come with restructuring, there's always a focus on the technical aspect of the change. And we miss focusing and paying some attention to that human side of the change. So where your focus is more on the analytics, the costs, the actual costs you want to cut, you're focusing on top-down execution, where a small team at the top is leading and directing the restructuring, and where you treat change management or the management approaches to change as more of a corporate communications gimmick or a marketing exercise, then what happens is that within the organization and across the organization, you see an overabundance of fear, anxiety, and distrust. And for everyone who has, in one way or the other, participated in any sort of restructuring, you know that this is very true. When not handled well, you see that most employees come to work scared. Your productivity is short. You all tribe mentality, that creation, that creativity, that spark that pushes you to go out there, you're scanning for opportunities and how to harness those opportunities for the good of the organization and yourself. Most of it is short. And you're focusing too much on what's coming next. Short-term profitability, yes, sometimes it goes up because costs have been cut, costs are going down. Innovation and productivity most times takes a dip, if at all, being flat. Long-term profitability, yes, if they are not flat, they are taking a dip. And again, it's because too much focus on the technical aspect of the change. Analytics, costs, top-down, execution, and corporate communication. Now, there's another approach, and one where business leaders, so every time I speak to business leaders, there's this fear. And first of all, they have a concern with business results. Very understandable, right? And then there is the fear that if they embrace some of what we're speaking and what we're asking and what we are sharing as insights that could actually work, that it might not be accepted, by the rest of the organization. However, research has shown that this alternative approach to restructuring actually works, okay? Now, it's one that activates the Thrive radar across the Thrive system, across the organizations, and ensures that when you're doing your analytics, you're taking and paying attention to feelings, right? And then when you're looking at costs, you're also looking at value and future opportunities, and you're communicating it to a broad group of staff. And you're also ensuring that you engage staff, you ensure that they're empowered, and they have some part in driving the restructuring. Now, just a quick story. One of the lessons we learned, or I learned particularly from the last time I was engaged, the last time I was engaged in a restructuring that failed. I consider it a failure because even if we completed the restructuring, the costs that we anticipated to save were saved. What we saw 12 months, 24 months, and 36 months down the line was a struggle to bring productivity to the levels it was prior to when the restructuring started. So one thing we learned and we took into the next restructuring efforts, and something that is at the bedrock of the Kotter methodology, is to engage a broad and diverse coalition, right? Ensuring that people across the length and breadth of the organizations are given a chance to participate and to speak, to get their voices heard, such that they have some sort of ownership and control over the process. Now, you might wonder and say, okay, how is this possible? Once the decision for restructuring is made, yes, I can understand that prior to that decision, you might want to keep it in-house, you might not want to share too much, but once that decision is made, it does pay to bring in various perspectives, to engage across the length and breadth of the organizations, and to also, empower a body of volunteers that would support management, executive management, in driving that restructuring. What we did with a particular financial services firm that we worked with, when we introduced this, the truth is that executive management at that particular point did not think it was going to work when we started that journey. But at the end of the journey, it was quite surprising. Now, the truth is this: there were some heartaches because people were going to lose their job. There was some downsizing, but we showed empathy. Management showed empathy. And because their actions matched their words, employees were able to see and recognize that empathy and build on it, right? Such that everybody, when we did the survey after the exercise, there was actually positive feelings from a majority of staff, including those that were affected by the downsizing. So this works. And one of the outcomes of this, other than the fact that you control uncertainty and you ensure that you build a foundation for the future, is that yes, short-term profitability will go up. Innovation and productivity will, at the very minimum, remain at the level it was prior to the start of the restructuring efforts, and long-term profitability will go up. Now, using this approach, there are 3 steps you can overlay over any sort of restructuring methodology. I'm going to run fast through this, but first, something I've alluded to is you need to build a case for change that highlights the benefits of the restructuring. Too often, a restructuring effort is always about cost cutting. Now, yes, the truth is most times, and this is something unfortunately we find, is that it is when organizations are in distress that they begin to think towards restructuring. The truth is you don't need to wait until you're actually in a financial distress. When the first signals of some sort of distress start to pop up on your dashboard, that's the better time to engage in a restructuring. And yes, when you get to financial distress, yes, you have to cut costs. But cutting costs cannot be the central theme and goal for that exercise. Now, when we were working with a recent client, it took a while for us to emphasize this, that there needed to be a bigger opportunity, something to show even the employees that are going to be remaining behind that this is the reason why you're doing this. And you need to clearly articulate that big opportunity such that they believe in it and they can buy in it, that they can buy into it. Now, apart from that, something you also need to do is understand that survive is going to be heightened and do all you can to calm survive across the organizations. Now, you need to match your actions with words, and you need to ensure that you're transparent and honest with your communications, even when you're uncertain as to how the restructuring is going to play out. Just come out and let people know that, yes, this is what you envision. There might be changes along the way. When those changes come, we're going to share, right? Demonstrate empathy, very critical, and always be consistent. Now, the second approach is to engage employees. Form a group, a guiding coalition, as Scott would like to say, of volunteers that would help and drive the restructuring effort. It always helps. And one other thing that helps is to work closely with the L&D department to ensure that you're building capabilities that employees need in order to drive the new future of the business. Now, this is really important because sometimes we forget that people make up a business, and that without people, you really cannot run any business. And no matter how you restructure, businesses, org structures, and the like, they're quite ephemeral concepts. People actually make it real. And you need to train people in the new behaviors, the new capabilities that you want them to imbibe in order to drive the organization. Very critical. And something we also find that is also critical is the need to redesign your reward and incentives to ensure that you are driving the behaviors and the performance you want to see. Now, finally, just to keep in mind, for most restructuring, there will be resistance. Now, I speak to this especially where there's going to be some sort of downsizing, there's going to be some sort of redundancy. Yes, you should expect resistance, but it's no reason for you to fight it, right? Realize that it's a human reaction for when employees and staff feel that they have lost control. Know that people are going to react differently to that particular instance, depending on their particular circumstance at that moment, and resist that tendency to approach employees that are resistant as if they are non-rational thinking troublemakers. Seek to understand and seek to speak to both their hearts and their heads, right? And perhaps also very importantly is to ensure that you get the buy-in and use informal opinion leaders and not only your positional and formal leaders. Always, always, always try and involve a broad spectrum of staff. This will help to break down resistance and drive your restructuring going forward. Now, so finally, restructurings, they're never easy. You just have to balance business results with the human aspects of change. And it perhaps will not be intuitive, but research and insights have shown that if you focus on the experience of the groups and people that are impacted by change, you're more likely to get the success that you're looking for from your restructuring. Plan thoughtfully and focus on collaborating and building efficiency and skills. So thank you, everyone. I trust that you learned and took some insights from what I just shared. I'm going to stop sharing now and take questions if there are any. And before we begin to take questions, Nick, let me just ask you. So one common refrain we get a lot is the question to, does this actually work over a broad spectrum of organizations, or is it just happenstance that we can quote, single successive companies that have actually embraced this and seen it work?
It's a great question, and I think it points to what do people need to see as a proof point, right? So when you said resistance is natural, there's something that we use in organizations when we're going through change, whether it's restructuring or otherwise, which is called Rogers' Law of Diffusion.
Yeah.
And Roger worked through a couple of different personas of how people react to change. On one side, you have innovators. So if any change comes their way, they're excited because they see it as a challenge, and challenge is what activates them. As you get through that and you get to more traditionalists, they want to see the data and they want to see it really work before they get on board. So I think, does it really work? It depends on what you need as an individual to see as proof. So if you just need a challenge and you see a new point of view or a new approach, many leaders will jump into that and say, I know the 5 other things I've tried don't work, so I'm willing to try a 6th, right? For the folks that need more data, there's a plethora of case studies out there on our website, and probably, Patrick, you have them available too, across industries. Something you mentioned that I really liked, we actually closed a plant down a couple of years ago and had a similar impact that you had. The 2,000 people that were transitioned out of the organizations answered 2 questions in their exit interviews at a 96% yes rate. 1, were they treated fairly? And 2, was this the right thing to do for the company? So somehow, using this methodology, the 2,000 people that were out of a job felt like they were treated fairly and actually saw that this was the right thing to do. There was outplacement services, all of the kind of human-centered transition bits around it, to your point. And their production metrics went up, and they were the highest quality and production metrics that they had in the last 6 months versus the 10 years prior. So there's something around, if you put this new approach into practice, you get better business results, and you get people who will be loyal to the leaders in the company moving forward.
Very true, and Nick. Something that I'm always eager to share with people that are asking, can this happen? Is this something that's also relevant for my own context? So it doesn't harm you to try, right? At the very worst, you can go back to your former approach if you feel it doesn't work, okay? And in all situations where we have had clients embrace this approach, we've actually seen tangible, success between what they used to do and what it is right now. Now, I see a comment by Antonio. Yes, I agree that signals from the marketplace are also valuable inputs. And we should also capture them and interpret them in the context of restructuring. And why that is important is that where survive is overheated, nobody is paying attention to the marketplace, right? They are all internalizing and looking for how to survive. And so it does help to activate your tribe, because when tribe is activated, you begin to pay more attention to the external environment, especially opportunities, versus focusing too much on threats. Nick, there's a question here. Maybe you should try. Jean Mitchell, good afternoon. How do you link the Kota approach in change management and the Hofstede's model?
I love that question because I was literally talking about it last week. I mentioned I live in Spain. You may have figured out by now that I'm American through my accent. I'm working in Italy and 4 or 5 other countries across Europe and the Middle East right now, and a bit in Africa. And yes, all of those cultural contexts are incredibly different. And if you don't get it right, you come off as being daft or uninformed or worst case, uninterested, right? So part of our model is you had said this, a guiding coalition. It's essentially more leadership from more people. So it is never the Cotter people coming in and saying, here's how you should do things. It is more about how can we find the right people that understand the culture, the context of the organization and the country, if that's important, and say, how can we empower you to help show your leadership teams what the right answers might be or what you might try. So it is never a listen, we have our origin stories in the Harvard Business School. In some levels, that's terrific. In other levels, the world doesn't need more Harvard business professors telling them what to do, right? So our model is essentially helping people tell themselves what to do.
Yeah, true. So I have a question here. You talked about the best time to start restructuring would be the first time of possible challenge. Could you please give an example of what this sign would be to enable an organization to initiate restructuring? Okay, so thank you, Perita, for that question. So the truth is, oftentimes, once growth begins to slow and you begin to get signals of inefficiencies within the organization, that is probably the best time to begin to look towards some sorts of restructuring. Now, again, remember that restructuring can take different forms. Oftentimes, it becomes the negative form, and one that's so readily prevalent, the downsizing and redundancies. That's because organizations have waited too long before trying to restructure. And so most times when we are talking with clients and we're like, yes, you might be profitable. Yes, you might be seeing some growth. But if you're looking at the signals, if your growth has begun to flatline, if your profit margins have begun to dip, if competitors have begun to appear on the horizon with new business models that are threatening you, if the market is beginning to get crowded, if your technology is dated, all these are signs that you should begin a restructuring. And the earlier you start, the much better it is for the organization as a whole and for the people in the organization in particular. So once you begin to see signals like that, that's some of the best time for you to start. So I see if there's any other question. Okay, we have one. I think I would take this for the Nigerian system, where most organizations are SMEs with informal leadership structures. How can the Kota change model be adapted to effectively drive successful and sustainable change? So, well, Julius, when you say adapted, I assume you mean that you feel it might not work for SMEs as they exist in Nigeria. But I can assure you that well implemented, they do work for SMEs, even for family-owned businesses. And now, though I personally do not have that experience, but we've seen research, even Kota, some case studies and proof points of family-owned businesses that have embraced this methodology and driven successful change, right? So what I would advise is probably contact us. we could share some invites. We do have a free 1 hour consult that you could take advantage of. We could share some insights as to how you could approach beginning to adopt the culture change model for your business to drive successful transformations for yourself. So thank you. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure we're going to be able to take any other questions, Nick. It was just so that we finish on time. We have 2 minutes left. Any final words before we go?
What I love the most about the questions is a lot of them were around implementation and how it could actually work in practice, which makes me think that people are thinking about how this can be practical and used in their business contexts. As an organization that prides itself on sharing our research as broadly as possible, that's what we're hoping for, that this is helpful and useful for the folks that have joined. Please share widely. And yes, like Patrick, like you said, we're available for follow-up calls if that's helpful. And thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you, Nick. And for Aminat, you asked for our contact information. We'll share with you. Everybody will get an email with the recordings and also with details of how to contact both StreetSet Integrated and Culture in case you need to walk through any particular change problems you might have. So thank you, everyone. I trust that you've learned something. We hope that you've actually taken one nugget. And I, for myself, if there's something I hope you've taken away from this session is the fact that there's another way to do restructurings. One that will give you a different results, sometimes and oftentimes better results, with a benefit size that is much more appreciable than the traditional method. And why you should embrace this is that if we are going to change our narrative as a country and as a continent, we need to ensure that our change efforts work, and they don't just work, but they actually produce amazing results. So thank you, everyone. Nick, thank you. Everyone that's stuck with us till now, thank you very much, and catch you in our next session.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.